Hello again. Today I'm going to be looking at putting a blind up. So blackout blind in a normal window, and what I'm going to be doing is doing it without having to drill into the lintel, because the lintels are always made of really hard concrete, I guess, and it's very difficult to drill into it without an SDS drill. I'm always a bit nervous, to be honest, as well, about drilling into the lintel right on the point where the stress is, and it could, well, it's unlikely to fall down, but it's always in the back of my mind. So we're going to look at a different way of doing it. So rather than drilling directly into it, what I'm going to do is add a batten. Now I've got an example here of one that I've already done. Now this has been up about 2 years, so there's no chance of it falling down. You can see there's a batten there, and then you attach the roller blind to the batten, and it just screws into wood. It's really easy to do, and this works on any size blind. I mean, this, if I step back, this is on a big set of double doors, so I've got 2 blinds there, one at either end to cover the entire of the doors, the bifolds, and then you have the controllers, the danglers at either end to make it go up and down. So I've been out to the DIY shop. I bought myself a roller blind. And make sure you get one slightly longer than the window, and don't mess about getting a made to measure one either. It costs a lot of money. Just buy a bog standard one that's just slightly longer than the gap that you need. If you're really lucky, your window will be the same size, but it never is. The next thing that you're going to need is a batten. So this is just plain pine, and it's just at least as long as the roller blind, at least as long as the gap in the window. The other thing I've got, you may or you may not need this, is a piece of rough sawn timber. It's cheaper if it's rough sawn, and that's, well, we'll see what that's for later. First things first, measure the window. Now, what we want to do is cut the batten to the right size, but beware, because it's not necessarily all square, so it may be a longer distance right up close to the window than it is on the outside, so beware of that. One of the things you can do is cut the batten just slightly too long, and then you can sort of mark it off and trim it to get an exact fit later. So I've roughly cut this wood about the right, slightly too long, and I can now try it in the hole. Okay, so I need to lose about another centimetre, so I'll just go chop bits off a bit at a time until I've got something that's a perfect fit. So here we go. I've chopped another bit off, and we do indeed have a perfect fit in there. Now you don't want it to be an absolute tight fit, because obviously the wood's going to expand and contract in the temperature and the humidity, so make sure there's a little bit of a gap there. But on to the next stage. So now, fixing the thing onto the top of the lintel, I'm going to use this stuff. The stuff I'm using is Evo sticks like. But lots of other brands are available. Now the glue's going to take a little while to dry, a couple of hours or so. So I need to find a way of holding this up into place whilst the glue dries. And that is where your second bit of wood comes in. So what I'm going to do now is to measure the gap. So this time, the up and down gap, which in this case is 115. So that is going to be the length of the battens that you need to cut, and actually slightly longer, because what I want to do is use those extra lengths. I should put this batten up, and then I should wedge it with 2 or possibly 3 pieces which are just slightly longer, so that I can wedge them in. So I'll go and cut some of those now. Maybe you've got other stuff, an old broom handle, anything which you can jam into the gap. Now the next bit's really important. You need to do a dry run to make sure that we can wedge this in place before we start putting glue on. So if it doesn't fit when you go put the glue on, you can get in a hell of a mess. So put that in place, take one of the bits of wood, and then that should just wedge in place. Now if you cut the wood slightly too long, what will happen is this. Okay, it's going to slip, so I need to cut just a little bit more off this wood so that it's almost vertical and it will wedge in place. So here we go. Put that in place. Put the piece of wood. That's much better. You can see the piece of wood there is almost vertical and it's wedged nicely in place. And I reckon I'm going to need 3. One in the middle and one at either end. Now it's time to add the glue, and do not do what I'm doing here and doing it on the carpet, because you will spill some. I'm going to take the risk, but take the top off this, and then really what I'm going to do, I'll do a bit where you can see it. I'm just going to give a sort of a zigzag shape. I don't want so much that it all squeezes out and makes a mess, but I want to make sure there's enough to stick it together. There, now that should be enough, because it will squash out flat once I wedge it in place. Okay, so here we go. This is the delicate part. What I want to do is try and put it in place in one go, so I don't want splatters all over the lintel. So put it in place at one end, and then the other, and then take one of the wedges, just wedge it in place. Okay, for all intents and purposes that is now fitted, but you can see there are gaps, so what I'm going to do is put another couple of wedges in to make sure that it's pressing against the top. Okay, and that's it now. Just make sure that those wedges are nice and tight. I don't want them falling down while I've gone for a cup of coffee. But now I'm going to leave that for about, well, a couple of hours, or probably overnight is a good bet, to make sure it's really solid before we do anything else to it. So now it's the next morning, what I'm going to do is take away the buttons. So there's one, here's the other one. Now, looking at this, you can see it's pretty solid. Feels like it could actually hang off that and it wouldn't come down. Absolutely solid. Fantastic. Next step is to paint it. Now you got a choice. You can either paint it in a gloss white to match the windows, or what I'm going to do is to paint it the same colour as the actual walls, so that it will basically merge in and you won't be able to see it. So painting it, one brush, one tin of paint, and off we go. I don't think I need to bother show you how to do that. Now the paint's dry, so it's time to open up the blinds. Let's tip it out and see what we've got in the box. And you should find you get one blind, and there should be instructions and a little box with all the components in it, all the important bits. So let's have a look in here. And what I'm expecting to find is two ends like that. These are particularly cheap looking ones, but essentially right angles with holes in that you can screw in, and we're just going to screw those onto the batten that we've added. And then there are various things which push into the end of here to let you, for it to pivot on, to let you to put the up and downy bit in. So that's that. Really, instructions, not really going to need those. Other various warnings and things. But the other thing to look at, it comes with a set of screws. Best things to do with this little packet of screws is to throw it in the bin, because they're always made of butter. And what we need is some screws which are no longer than the thickness of the batten. If we use screws that are longer than the thickness of the batten, they're going to go through the batten and they're going to push on the brick, on the concrete above, and it's going to try and push the batten off. So you want screws, and just pop down to Screwfix and get some decent wood screws, just slightly longer, just slightly shorter, sorry, than the distance. If you add this distance on to the thickness of the batten, no longer than that. So what the instructions usually say is to measure the gap in the window, and then to subtract something like 10 or 20 mil, which represents the thickness of these, and then cut this to that size. But that seems a silly thing to do to me. What I always do is I fix these first, and then I measure the gap, and that will allow for any sort of movement away from the wall that I've got, or any sort of slight angle that's on there. So once you've measured between the 2 points that you've hung up, the next thing is to measure the width of these things, because these obviously are going to take some off the length as well. That looks like about 5 mil, but I'll give those a quick measure. That's almost nothing. That one will make a difference, so I'm going to have to take another centimetre-ish off. Okay, hang it up. First of all, make sure you've got the right one One's for the end that's got the pull cords on it, and one's just free flow. So choose which end you want that. And then literally, obviously the little thing goes towards the inside. Take a screw, take a screwdriver, and then just position it where you want it on the end there. And then just do up the screw, that easy. Obviously we'll put 2 in. Now you can drill pilot holes if you want to, and that'll stop the wood splitting, but I'm not bothering. And there we are, that's one at either end. And then take my tape measure. I'm just going to measure the gap in between the two. Now, cutting the blind to size, you're going to need a big flat area, like a kitchen table or a hard floor. Don't really want to do it on a carpeted floor unless you have to, because obviously it's all squashy and you won't get good lines. So, what I've done, put the blind out. You can just unroll it onto the table, like so. It wants to come back, I might have to put a weight on it. And then you can take a tape measure and essentially put the tape measure at the far end, and it will hook onto the end of the blind. Measure the distance that we want, and in this case it's going to be 171, and just mark it with a pencil, and then go along, and every sort of foot or so mark it again, so you end up with a whole line of pencil marks. And when you get to the end, obviously as you go along, this second part rolls up, so you can essentially roll the blind out, mark it, roll it up, roll the blind out, mark it, roll it up until you get to the end. So in this next step, what I'm doing is taking a long meter rule, and I'm just joining up between all of the little lines, and that way I can draw a nice straight line with my pencil straight down through all the lines, and I'll get something that I can then use as a guide to cut with. Now at this point, it's a really useful tip. You can actually slide the blind out of the top roller if you're careful. So just give it a pull. Okay, because it's just got a 90-degree bend in it, and that makes it much easier to cut. And then all you need to do is take a decent pair of scissors and very carefully cut along the line that you've drawn. The moment of truth. So that's the line cut, and you don't need to seal the ends or anything. They're something that doesn't fray. Now the next thing is, you'll notice this tube is now longer than the blind, so we're going to have to cut the tube next. So first things first, I'm just going to mark the length while it's here. So I'm going to make sure it's lined up against the far end and mark it with pencil here. Now what I like to do at this point is to take this tube off completely so I can take it into the garage and cut it. Sometimes it can be difficult to get it back on again, so you just have to be very careful and look how it comes apart. And you can, if you want to, cut it in situ. You can just extend that and then get a hacksaw and chop it. I'm going to take it into the garage. So nice and firmly in the vise, take a hacksaw, find the mark that you've made. Now once you've done it, just take a flat file and take off the sharp edges, because otherwise you will cut yourself. At this point you'll find there's also a weight thing that goes along the bottom, so you're going to need to cut exactly the same off that. So measure it up against here and then chop the end off that as well. Okay, so now metal bar is back in place. It wasn't too difficult to slide back on. If you've done it right, it should line up. Also you need to add the weight at the bottom. It goes into just a slot at the bottom. It may have been in there in the first place. You just slide that in. And now's the time to think about which way you want the blind to roll. If you want the nice side of the blind into the room, and this one, I don't think there's a great deal of difference between the inside and the outside, but sometimes there is, then you might want to think about rolling this back the other way. So if I roll it this way, what will happen when I hang it up, I'll get this side into the room, because I want the outside of the blind going down the window to give me the most space. If you want it the other way, you can flip it over and you can literally roll it the other way around. It's up to you which way you hang it. So there we are, it's rolled up, ready to go up. Back upstairs now, it's the moment of truth. You take the blind, try it in the space, and it should just be round about the width of the little end attachments short, which looks like it is. Fantastic, which means now you can take the end attachments, figure out which one's which, it pushes in, and then we try it in place. Now all blinds have their little idiosyncrasies as to how they work. This one has a little catch that goes in, so we put it in with the end with the danglers on first, push it into the second one, and then this slots in to fix it. Let's see if it's as easy as it sounds. Seemed okay. Unfortunately, this is where the no holes drilled bit goes a bit wrong, because there's a safety device that you have to add, and that needs to be attached to the wall, in this case like that, so that the wire can run through it, the cable can run through it. If you don't do that, this ends up being hanging like that. What can happen is a small child can put their head in it, and then the rest is obvious. So you must always, even if you haven't got small children, you must always do that, because the next people to move into your house might. So all you do, figure out which way around it goes. If it looks to be like that, pull it so that it's got a little bit of tension on it, decide where you want it, mark the wall, and then drill a couple of holes. I guess you could glue it, but not sure that that would hold it very firmly. Masonry bit, hammer action. So there we are, a couple of raw plugs in, which I'll finish off with a hammer. And we're good to go. I can put those screws in, and I might even use the ones that were supplied with it. Okay, that's done. Be careful with plastic. If you tighten the screws too tight, it'll crack it. Okay, and there we are. One working blind. I think that's job done. There we go, you can see it in there. Right, so hopefully that was helpful. If it was, feel free to press the subscribe button, and maybe I'll see you next time.